Remember back in the days of PC gaming where the only mainstream method of keeping our beastly CPUs cool was to use robust, unwieldy, and sometimes hideous air coolers? This one's not hideous, I love the Svantex ones. Those were dark times indeed. Actually, not really. Air coolers were, and still are, pretty great ways to cool a CPU, and some of them are pretty great to look at too. But still, there's just something about AIO liquid coolers that ups the wow factor of most rigs substantially. Not only do they give you a noticeable advantage when it comes to cooling, sometimes they also look clean and stylish, and depending on your radiator size will fit into almost any build. But not all AIOs are created equal. Some look good while not cooling well at all, others cool extremely well but look like something out of a horror movie, and on the rare occasion, one comes around that ticks both boxes and is usually horribly expensive. But Raijintek's new Orcus AIO might just be able to change all of that. The Orcus is the follow-up to Raijintek's Triton series coolers. You might recognize the Triton as the AIO that sprung a leak on me when I succeeded mostly at making coffee with Coffee Lake a few months ago, though that happened partly because of a lack of maintenance on my end, not because the Triton was faulty. That's my fault, my bad. I used it in a way it shouldn't have been used. The Orcus does use a similar 240mm radiator, but differs a fair bit from the Triton. It features a fairly meaty water block complete with a flow indicator, has an external pump connected directly to the tubing, and comes with two RGB 120mm fans. Pricing hasn't been yet confirmed in the US as far as I can tell, but we expect it to come in at around the $60 to $70 mark based on its other competition. In South Africa, it's expected that the Orcus will come in at 1,199 Rand or 1,299 Rand, depending on where it falls. Anyways, that makes it one of the less expensive AIO coolers on the market and only a few $100, Rand bucks more than the original Triton 240 cooler. What makes the Orcus unique, at least at this price point, is that it's fully decked out with RGB lighting and not the RGB like the Triton claimed to be, where you had see-through tubes and you could add red, green, or blue dye, since Raijintek was on the RGB hype train before it was cool. But really, not only is the flow indicator in the block fully lit up, but the Orcus is one of the very few AIOs that ship with fully RGB-ified fans. It also comes with the lighting controller hub that allows lighting to be controlled via software or an included wireless remote that doesn't include a battery for whatever reason. What kind of cost-saving measure is it to not include a battery for a remote that you put in? Like, Raijintek, include a battery, please. But all of that makes the Orcus seem pretty dang appealing, and on an aesthetic front, it certainly does look good. The water block looks smooth, the window that allows you to see the flow indicator features a pretty cool etched Raijintek logo, and the whole thing looks even better thanks to the embedded lighting. The two included RGB fans aren't half bad either. While they're not my favorite design looks-wise, the lighting ring is surprisingly bright and features various modes to suit any mood. Unfortunately, I can't overlook the fact that the water block as a whole looks a little more dated than I'd have liked. And the RGB fans, while a nice addition, have this kinda cheap look to them. It's not that they look bad, it's just clear that they can't hold a candle to the RGB implementations of more premium fans like the Corsair's LL series. But hey, this is a CPU cooler, so how well does it do what it's supposed to? I pitted the Orcus against Corsair's ever-popular H100i V2 AIO and recorded temps with our Ryzen 5 1600 system at idle while playing a few matches of Overwatch, and lastly while under heavy load with the help of AIDA64 stress test. I initially tested the coolers with the 1600 at its stock settings, then repeated all of the testing with the chip overclocked to 3.9 GHz. We also made sure to use the exact same thermal paste with both coolers. With the 1600 at stock settings and the system at idle, we were instantly presented with some surprising numbers. The H100i V2 reported a CPU temp of 30C, while the Orcus came in at only 26C. That's a fairly decent sized gap, and a gap that continued into gaming tests where the H100i V2 averaged about 39C, while the Orcus came in to 36.5. With those numbers, you'd expect to see similar results with the 1600 under max load, and wouldn't you know it, that's what we got. Under full load, the H100i V2 reported chips temps around 50C, while the Orcus reported 47. This trend continued once we pushed the 1600 to 3.9 GHz. The Orcus continued to report lower temps than the H100i in all three instances, and not by insignificant margins too. This could mean one of three things. Firstly, it could be that the Orcus is just a fantastic cooler that straight up wrecks the likes of our H100i V2. Our office isn't climate controlled, so a change in ambient temperature could have played a hand in these results. But at the same time, it was not 2 to 3 degrees hotter. It was like 1 degree hotter. So take that for what it's worth. Even if the Orcus and the H100i V2 reported more or less the same temperatures, that would still make the former the better value buy thanks to its RGB fans the controller included in the box, and its cheaper price tag. And now the Orcus subjectively looks good, performs better than expected, better than we expected at least, and seems like a great value if it does indeed end up around the $60 to $70 price point. But I'm sure many of you are expecting a catch somewhere, and you'd be right in doing so because there are quite a few things I didn't quite like about the Orcus. As I mentioned earlier, even though the RGB lighting is appreciated and is remarkably bright, there's just something about it I don't love. The lighting on the fan seems too half-baked. It looks cheap, probably because it is, and we're not thrilled about that. Or maybe we're spoiled by Corsair's fans, who knows. The only other aesthetic issue we had with the cooler is that the water block is a little too bulky for our taste. But those are just our preferences and can be overlooked. But while the look of the block is subjective, the weird thing is that most AIOs actually have a bulky block because they include a pump. The fact that Raijintek doesn't include the pump and actually manages to have a bigger block than the Corsair H100i V2 is actually kind of curious, and its bulkiness is really difficult to actually explain. What we can't overlook, however, are a few design choices Raijintek decided to go with. First off, while it's a neat idea to attach the unit's pump directly to the tubes, it isn't all that practical. Sure, it may eliminate internal pressure in the block, but its placement interferes with various components depending on where you mount the radiator. And the pump's housing looks and feels like it'll break with even the smallest bump. The next issue that I had with the Orcus is something that also annoyed the crabopples out of me with the Triton. The cables are just idiotically short. There are normally a lot of cables to deal with when you're going with an AIO, and the Orcus is no different. Each individual part has its own cable, including each fan, the block itself, and the exterior pump. All of those need to be plugged in somewhere, and that somewhere is located on varying spots depending on your motherboard. This seems like pretty common knowledge to us, but apparently that's something Raijintek yet again didn't put much thought into. While the unit's tubing is pretty lengthy, whether you like it or not, and you know, the Triton definitely suffered from having way too long tubes, the cables for connecting the pumps and the fans are hilariously short. Even using our short test bench, getting all of the cables to reach where they're supposed to go on the motherboard was a nightmare. We ended up having to balance the radiator very precariously on the side of the bench frame just to get everything to reach. I understand that there are different motherboards in cases of various form factors, but come on, Raijintek, would it have killed you to at least extend the cable or include extension cables in the freaking box? This is exactly what the Triton suffered from with its fans. The cables were hilariously short, the tubing was extra long, so if you wanted to have the tubing at the front of a giant case, you couldn't get the fans to actually reach the motherboard to turn them on. Luckily though, Raijintek included a lighting controller for the fan LED connectors, which made them reach a little further. Otherwise, I would have written a very strongly worded letter because everything would have just been too short. All of that aside though, I do quite like Raijintek's new cooler. It's a capable piece of tech that looks better than most in its suspected price range, and I kinda can't stop looking at the block's flow indicator. There's just something mesmerizing about watching it spin, reminding me that my CPU is being kept nice and cool. I'd have liked the Orcus even more if it didn't suffer from the same oversights that affected the Triton and was built with out-of-the-box compatibility for all systems in mind, but it still does enough and offers enough for it to be worth considering if you're planning an upgrade to liquid cooling. And when I say compatibility for all systems, I don't mean that the Orcus can't fit the typical socket. It has everything that you need to get on any of the mainstream sockets, but rather that the disparate lengths of the cables is something that can cause issues with your Mobo's pump header if it's beyond the reach of the pump cable. It's not designed for all motherboards. It's an unfortunate issue on an otherwise solid, inexpensive cooler. It's something that would make me heavily consider going with the Cooler Master Master Liquid ML240L RGB cooler instead, because it has an integrated pump on the CPU block and likely won't have as many issues with being to fit in a variety of cases. The Cooler Master ML240L has both an RGB block but then also RGB fans included with it, and while I very much prefer the look of the Orcus, all of that RGB still isn't sufficient enough that I wouldn't necessarily be missing out by going with Cooler Master. I appreciate where Raijintek has taken the idea of the Orcus, a good looking cooler that does things a bit differently than the rest of the competition, either due to innovation or due to not being able to develop their own pump block combo, but their uniqueness is unnecessary here. Being different for the sake of being different isn't directly akin to innovation, and the pump on the tubes just feels out of place. I'm sure there's plenty of practical reasons Raijintek had for going with this design, but given the short cable to plug the pump in and the fact that the block for the cooler isn't really all that smaller than other AIOs that have an integrated pump solution, I have a hard time seeing what the rationale is from my side as a consumer. It's not a deal breaker for me to have it in my system, but it may be for you if you have an oddly positioned pump header on your motherboard, or you want to have like the radiator a mile away, then you're not going to be able to plug it in. Overall though, I think it's a a welcome improvement over their previous RGB Triton cooler and brings a more expected aesthetic look that communicates a bit more quality than just a pure acrylic block that the Triton had. And with that, I want to thank Wootware for sending the Orcus over for us to review. If you're in South Africa and you're looking for all the components you need to build your next gaming rig, Wootware should be the obvious choice. With a superb selection on a wide variety of PC parts, some of the dopest prices in South Africa, and their customer-focused service attitude that's honestly, it rivals the best companies in the world. Wootware will make buying that next PC a wonderful experience. So if you're in South Africa, head on over to wootware.co.za to woot up your rig. Their link will be in the video description. Let me know and let Wootware know what you think of the Orcus. Do you like the design? Would the short pump cable be an issue on your system? What do you think of having the pump on the cabling instead of built into the block? Let me know either down in the comments or over on Twitter. I'm at UFDisciple. And if you're in the US and want to pick up the Orcus or any other PC component, you can use our Amazon affiliate code that's in the description. It helps support the channel and it's free for you to use if you shop on Amazon. Anyways, I am Brett with the UFD Tech channel. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.